As many of you know, ever since I was very, very small, I've participated in the sport of fencing. And fencing is a beautiful and wonderful sport to be a part of. It's also filled with a lot of jerks. A lot of people who do really well often seem to be the ones who are the meanest, too. And because of that, growing up in that environment, sometimes suffering in that environment, I've always tried to do my best to be very sportsmanlike, even in losing, to try to help those who are just getting started or who are younger as they are coming up and they are learning and they are trying to become better fencers themselves. Because I had this attitude when I was a seminarian, I would often go to Nashville because it was close enough by and there were some good tournaments there. And Nashville's a fun place to visit. And one of the places there that holds a lot of tournaments is Vanderbilt University. And over time, I grew to know the fencers at Vanderbilt very well and become friends with them. In fact, one of the fencers who was a leader of that group was somebody who I knew, whose family I fenced with up in Swanee. Towards the end of my time in seminary, I had to take a little bit of a hiatus, and so my final year, I really wanted to dive back into my fencing, and I really wanted to participate in as many tournaments as I possibly could. So every opportunity I had, I'd go down, usually to Nashville, for a tournament. And one of these times, if memory serves, the beginning of my senior year, at least towards the beginning, I remember going in. This was either my first or my first, one of my first in a while, tournaments to participate in. And I remember this guy there, when I got there, talking with some other folks, and basically saying, I'm so tired, I didn't get much sleep last night, I don't know how well I'm going to do in this tournament. It's kind of hard to know how to take that, whether he was being serious or whether he was trying to psych everybody else around him out. Now, this particular fencer, we'll call him Peter. That's not his name, but we'll call him Peter. He was a really good fencer. Not to go into too much detail for those who don't know a lot about fencing, there are 3 different weapons. He was an epéist. This was a foil tournament. Épée, the whole body is the target. Foil is just the chest, sides, and back. But they're similar enough styles. And Peter was a really amazing and talented epéist, like an expert at it. So this is somebody going in. He had this expertise. Apparently he had just started his own club in the area, so was either really good at business or just was doing really well in his side gig. And Peter was somebody going in that was a favorite. He was somebody that was slated to do well. Somebody who typically did do very well. Now, I'm going to let hearing him saying this whole thing about being tired and not having gotten enough sleep and not knowing how he was going to do that day, I could have let that psych me out. But it didn't. I had been around guys like this, as I said, for quite a while in fencing. And my own fencing at the time was going pretty well. So I just let what he said to the side, went and did my thing, ended up beating him, and won this whole tournament. Now after the tournament, the Vanderbilt team took me out to dinner. I wasn't their teammate, but when I went out, it was clear why they wanted to take me out to dinner. It had turned out that Peter had been really difficult for them to deal with. As an owner of his own club, he was trying to go in and manage how the Vanderbilt team was doing things and trying to get them to do things that, frankly, they didn't need to do, frankly, were really difficult for a collegiate and undergraduate even program to really implement. And he was kind of a jerk to them in other ways. And yet, he won every single time he was there. Now, they liked me, and part of it was because I was actually nice to them. And so, the reason they took me out to dinner afterwards, the reason they wanted to celebrate with me, not a member of their team, in this victory, was because my beating Peter for them felt like a rebalancing of the universe. It felt like a rebalancing of forces, that somebody they liked finally beat this person that had been so difficult for them to deal with. Now, unfortunately, in the world around us, it often seems like the jerks, the big guys, win. That's what sometimes seems to always happen in the world around us. And sometimes it seems like there's no hope for the little guy, the nice person, the underdog. Yet, every now and then, we see that underdog, that nice person, that little guy, pull out a victory in the end. Maybe on occasion, we get to witness that personally for ourselves, or even be that underdog in that victory. And this is really what all of our readings today are about. That unexpected victory. And we don't just get to hear examples of that unexpected victory. We get to hear why it happens, and even how it happens. We see this first with David. Now, David is a little guy. He can't even fit into the armor that he's been given to wear for battle. And he's expected to go up against Goliath. Goliath, whose name has been given for one of the terms for giant. That's how big this guy was. And as far as the Israelites were concerned, as far as they were witnessing, he was also unbeatable. And yet, David goes out, doesn't have any armor, doesn't have any conventional weapons, really just a staff and a few stones and a slingshot. And he goes up against all odds and defeats this unbeatable Goliath. Now this is what paves the way for David in this victory. He tells everyone who will sit there and listen to him various different words, that at the end of the day, no matter what odds he's facing, and he was facing pretty insurmountable odds, no matter what, the Lord will save him. Those are his words. The Lord will save him. God is the only weapon that David needs. God is the reason that David wins at the end. This is what we hear in our psalm today as well, which just so happens very appropriately to be a psalm of David. And at the very beginning of that psalm, what lays out the rest of it for us, David tells us, the Lord will be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble. Now, aside from David, we also get the example of his descendant very far down the line. We get the example of Jesus. Jesus also being a small person against something very, very mighty. In our gospel today, we see Jesus in the boat with his disciples. And all of a sudden, a storm takes them. There's a storm out there oppressing them. Now, Jesus was, according to tradition, a carpenter. We could also say a tool maker. Fishing was not his thing, but it was for most of his disciples. So they should have known what to do in the middle of a storm like this. And yet, they freak out and they turn to Jesus. Jesus sleeping there in the boat out of fear and panic to see if he will do something, to see if he can help them. Jesus gets up and calls out to the storm with just a few words in our translation. In the original in Mark, it's actually just two words, two commands. Peace, be still. With those two tiny words, phrases, commands, Jesus is able to calm the storm around him. Jesus does this even though he's not mighty. He's just a normal human like the rest of us, which is really the point. But Jesus can do this even as a human, because he is God, become fully human. In the end, just as with David, Jesus conquers the storm because of the presence of God in Jesus. Because Jesus is God in the full weakness of humanity. So in the end, the weak do win out over the mighty. And this happens for one reason, and one reason only. Because of God. Because of God, the weak are able to win over the mighty. We don't have to be better or stronger than others to win. We do have to be kind. We do have to trust in God and God alone to give us that victory. We don't have to be a storm or a giant. We just have to realize our weakness and smallness. We have to recognize that the only one who can get us through, the only one who can get us through anything that we are facing, is our Lord.